Everyone, what is up? Today we're going to go over Firebase and the differences between the real-time database and the Firestore database, and what we're going to use in our own app moving forward, and all the other features that comes with it. So first, if you go to Firebase, you're going to have to create an account with Google. If you don't already have a Gmail account, I would create one because you're going to need one for this, because Google bought out Firebase a couple years ago, and so now they're kind of running things in the Firebase world. And it's kind of awesome because they're adding a ton of new features to it. When Firebase first started, it was just a real-time database. So it was just basically like a cloud store for a JSON object, and it was just a real-time connection. So it was great for chat apps, but terrible at actually storing like structured data. And so over the last couple of years, Firebase introduced a ton of new features, and we're gonna use a bunch of them for our apps because there's a lot of free tiers for that. So I just love using it. Even if I had to pay for a paid plan, I probably would at first until it wasn't economically feasible. But to get started, I don't think there's a better service than Firebase. This is not a sponsored video. I just love using Firebase that much. It just makes it so much easier. I don't have to worry about the backend, authentication, storage, whatever it may be. And I know it's always going to be up and running. And so first, we're going to go into the console. Like I said, if you log in, create an account, you're going to have to create a project. For this one, I just named it Instagram tutorial. And the first page you'll see is this getting started page by Firebase. And then I would keep in mind, we are building an iPhone app or an Android app, but when you're using the credentials or the documentation for Firebase, you're going to use the web version. So we're just going to treat it just like we would adding Firebase to a website. So when we're starting to use our credentials, there's iOS, there's Android, and then there's web. So always use the web credentials, use the web documentation, because that's how we're gonna treat it in our app. So first we're gonna go to the features, and the big one that I always use is authentication. So they give you a couple of different providers, as in like sign-in methods, from just email and password, which we'll implement. You could use just a phone number. You could use Google Login. Play games and Game Center are new. I'm not really sure how many people are logging in with those ones. Facebook is another big one that we'll add to our app as well. And then you could also log in with Twitter, GitHub, and then Anonymous, which is a little bit more complex. We're not going to do the Anonymous one. And then to get it running through your app, you just have to connect the code and then just enable it from the Firebase side. So right now you can see they're all disabled. To enable it, you're just going to click Enable, and then that's it. So we still have to do like the code side of it, obviously, but from the Firebase side, that's all that has to happen. You just go to the documentation for this login authentication, which we'll do in the next episode, and it's up and running. Super simple. No more outside libraries we have to use. We just have to connect to Firebase. And what makes it cool is using login for Firebase is that you could authenticate people to only for certain sections. So if you only want someone to write to the database or read the database if they're logged in, you can make a rule for that. So if we go to the database center, we'll go over the databases first actually. So there's two different types of databases. There's the Firestore database, which is new. It's technically still in beta, but it's been in beta for the last year and a half, I believe. And they're definitely moving forward with it. So I think it's safe to say that we could use it. And then their first part was the real-time database. So you can see that they're really pushing the Firestore database because you have to scroll down and you have to know what you're looking for if you want the real-time database. When I first started using Firebase, all I used was the real-time database because that's all there was, but it's also really cool to do live activity. So like I said before, a great example is a chat app where you want instant feedback from that chat. So you could stay in the chat, do no reloading at all. Firebase handles like the updating of the state. But we're actually since we're using React and Redux, we don't want Firebase to handle the state. So Firestore is still somewhat real time, but it doesn't use as much data on someone's phone as a real-time database would. Another cool idea for a real-time database would be like trying to rebuild the Uber app. So you request an Uber and you can see the status of that taxi or Uber or car or whatever real time as they turn down streets and everything, or Google Maps, something like that would be really cool to implement, which I do want to do eventually. But for us, we're going to use Cloud Firestore because the data we have for Instagram is more structured. So we have users, those users have posts, those posts have comments and likes. And I think that's it for off the top of my head. And then we have messages associated to users. So like everything has a relational, goes back to that user. And so it's a lot easier to query using Firestore. So it's not the traditional SQL database, it's still NoSQL. So we're gonna have to use some foreign keys, and that foreign key we're gonna use is the user ID that we get from Firebase when we authenticate a user. So we're just gonna be able to track a user throughout the entire state and all the actions they do throughout the app using their user ID, which is a very unique string of letters, uppercase, lowercase, and then numbers to differentiate that from just a regular name or username. So for our app, we're going to use Firestore, we're going to use authentication, and we're also going to use storage. So I did a previous app where I rebuilt Tinder, but the images that were uploaded, I used an AWS S3 bucket. And I noticed a lot of people are having trouble connecting to AWS because it's definitely not as user-friendly, to say the least, as Firebase is. That's why I like to use Firebase a lot, especially when teaching people, because it's super easy to get up and running, and it's a lot more detailed documentation than S3 is. S3 is going to be a ton cheaper, and it's probably a better option in the long term, but to get started, to build that MVP, to get your first couple 100,000 users, Firebase is perfect for that. And so we're going to use the storage option to upload photos. So if someone uploads a photo for their post, or someone uploads a photo for their user to update it, or to just sign up for the first time, we're going to use the storage option in Firebase. And once again, it just makes it super easy, since everything is in Firebase, to not reference different libraries, worry about something being broken or not connecting. You know, if you're connected through authentication, that part's not wrong, something else is wrong with the code or something. So it's a lot easier to debug when you're all using one service. And then we're not going to use hosting, but I have used it in the past as well. So we started off this series with building out a regular React web app. In development mode, it uses a server to listen for live updates, but if you were to build that, it creates static files. And you could actually host those static files in Firebase for free. Basically, it's just like you could host static files in S3. You could host the same thing in this hosting section, and you could use HTTPS for secure navigation with the hosting through Firebase. And so let's say you wanted to build an app, an iPhone app and an Android app, and then you also wanted to build a web app for maybe just marketing purposes, or even to users log in. You could use Firebase for all of those things, and still stay under the free limit, given the amount of depending on the amount of traffic you get. And so I just love Firebase to get started. I don't know if I'd recommend anything else to get started. And then the combination of Firebase and React Native is just awesome. And they also have a few analytics dashboards down here. You can track events, conversions, audiences, funnels. I honestly haven't used a ton of these because they're fairly new, but the options are there if you want them. And they also have Crashlytics, which is pretty cool. If you're testing any errors in your app in production, you could use Crashlytics to find who errored out and what they did to error out, so you could go in and fix it. And then that combined with our Expo over-the-air updates, we could find an error in Crashlytics, fix it, and update it right away without having to go to the App Store. So all these technologies I picked was to streamline the process of building out an MVP app, and then testing it out, making those fixes right away, and not having a long drawn-out process just to test out your idea or build an app from scratch. And so in the next episode, we're going to log in with a email and password through Firebase authentication. And so I hope you join me then. See ya.